Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Lady Coquine.
For the last 7 years of my life, I've been a professional dominatrix. Yes, you can applaud. Yes, thank you. It's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it. And the reason that drew me that kind of work was not only being a boss lady and somebody who's good at fetish and those kinds of things, but I'm also a creative healer and a creative problem solver, which I think are my two greatest talents. And I like to use that in my sessions because they require a lot of creative problem solving. And I would say that my average clientele was about 38 to 65, usually white, usually married. And they came to see me because they were missing something in their life. And they came to see me for that fulfillment. And just to let you know, my sessions never involved any sex. They never touched me. And they were only allowed to touch me if I instructed them to, which was mostly just my foot or my legs. Never any bodily contact or fluids exchanged. So a lot of you are wondering, why would somebody pay for that? Well, I'm really good at what I do. And so I was traveling about a year ago, and when I travel back to my hometown area, I usually look up clients that I've seen before, and they're usually eager to come see me. And a couple clients did, but there were some clients that didn't come see me. They were busy. So I decided to post an ad. And I usually don't do that when I'm traveling because it's a little bit harder to coordinate with new people. So I posted an ad, and I got some responses. And one of the responses was from this young gentleman. He was about 22 or 23 years old. And I usually don't take these inquiries very seriously because when it comes down to the payment aspect, those 23-year-olds really can't afford me. That's all right, though. But my intake process is simple. You go to my website, you fill out my questionnaire, a very detailed questionnaire about your fetishes and your experiences. I will email you back. I will ask you to put a down payment on an interview. At that interview, I will ask you a bunch of questions. And if everything goes well, I will let you book a session with me. Now, that's slightly different when I'm traveling because that all happens in the same day. So I didn't give it much thought when this person, filled out my questionnaire. They were very thoughtful with their answers. And they placed a deposit. And I thought, all right, let's go. Let's do this. So it wasn't until I was actually making the hour-and-a-half drive to meet them that I was like, oh, fuck. Oh, they're not going to show up. They're 23. They're not going to show up. They still owe me $350. Like, they're not going to show up. I've already put a down payment on a hotel, and I'm already driving up here, and I'm going to be wasting my time. But I, went through with it. And I went to the hotel, and I checked in, and I did my post-session, preparation, which I laid out all my toys and my rope and a sexy outfit, a corset and high heels and stockings. And I pamper myself and I masturbate a lot. And I look in the mirror and I, gear myself up for these sessions. And I was still feeling very apprehensive about this session, just thinking like this person is, they could not show up. I could be out all this money and time. But I set the time at the bar, and I met them there, and I got there a little early. And I chose my favorite bar, which is located in Madison, Wisconsin, between an Ace Hardware and a Mexican convenience store. It's called La Tigre Lounge. And when you walk in, besides being slightly blinded because it's so dark in there, tiger carpet, tiger pictures, a tiger coming out of the wall, and a piano. And instead of drinks behind their bar, there's tiger figurines. And there's an old-timey bartender, and when you walk up, he's humming one of the 200 songs on their old-timey jukebox. And I order my favorite drink, an old-fashioned, which you can only order in Wisconsin and made right. Promise you that. And I sit there and I wait, and I'm wearing leather boots, leggings, a dress, leather coat, and I'm just waiting there. And I'm still thinking this person might not show up, but because I do not wait for my clients, so they better be on time. So at 7:02, he shows up, 2 minutes late, and I'll give him that. He's tall, 23, brown hair, youthful-looking face, very kind eyes, and I invite him to sit at the table with me. And I proceeded to interview him. And my interview is not easy. I am very intense in my interview, and I am giving the strongest eye contact that I can give, and I am sitting the straightest I can possibly be, and I am looking the most intimidating that I can possibly pull off, which is pretty intimidating. And I asked people a series of questions about how they've arrived to me, what kind of dominant figures they've had in their life, and why they think a dominatrix is going to, solve their problems. And a lot of people answer these questions with sexual experiences they've had. Well, they've had a dominant lover, or they've never had a dominant lover, or they have that boss they want to fuck. But this person, who I will call Madison for the rest of the story, actually answered my questions differently. He answered my questions about some of his friendship experiences. And he said that he had a friend who was a very strong-willed friend. And he enjoyed being his friend because he chose the adventure. He chose where to go and what to do, and he was along for the ride, and he appreciated that. And so that's a very interesting answer to me. I've never had anybody answer something that's their friendship. Nobody's ever done that before. This client's already shaping up to be a quite unusual client. But in addition to that, his answers are more thoughtful and more inspiring than most of my clients can even put together. And at the end of the interview, I offer him my services, and I also give a rare opportunity to let my clients ask any questions they'd like of me. And this is the only time I will let them ask any personal question, anything. And most people just waste that question. They're like, how tall are you in heels? And I had red hair. Is purple your natural hair color? Yeah. Like, come on. Can't you come up with something good? And now I don't remember the exact question that he asked me that night. But he asked me a question about me. And that's the first time I've actually somebody's asked me a question about me. And I remember my breath changing, and I remember my posture changing, and I remember that hard facade melting in that question while I answered it. And I sat across from this kind-hearted person. And I knew it was going to be a very different session. So I offered them my services, and I'm also very specific about how I like money handed to me. I like money handed to me in a white envelope that's unsealed so that I can count it. Well, when it was time for me to get the rest of my session fee, he just handed me a wad of money across the table at a bar. Like, awkward. In there. And I got in my car, and I told him where to meet me at the hotel. And when I was in my car, I was thinking, I could just leave. I have all the money I need right now. I could just go home and fuck this. And I was thinking that until I got to the hotel parking lot. And when I got out of the hotel, I hadn't even realized it yet, but as a signal, as a sign, he's holding the scarf that I left at the bar. And I knew then that this session was supposed to happen. I was supposed to go through with this. And I led him upstairs into the hotel room that I had already had prepared. And, I sat on the bed and I talked to him for a minute. And I showed him the sexy outfit that I had laid out, corset, heels, stockings, and I asked him if he'd like me to get into that costume. And he said no. Nobody's ever said no to that before. And I said, are you sure? And he said, no, I think you're dressed quite fine. Okay. So I switch places with him, and I sit on the bed, and I tell him to take his clothes off and fold them neatly on the nightstand. Now, you must understand that I've asked every single one of my clients to take their clothes off neatly and put them somewhere in front of me. I have watched hundreds of people take off their clothes in front of me and fold them neatly. So when I say that he took off his clothes, not too fast and not too slow, and he folded them very neatly, he did. And as I'm watching him take off his clothes, he's already starting to get aroused. And I have him kneel in between my thighs, and I squeeze his body in between my thighs, and I slowly pull out the collar I had beside me, and I put it around his neck and fasten it. And I pet his face and I tell him, "You're mine now. And I get to do whatever I want with you. Do you understand?" Good, because I didn't tell you to speak. And so I stand him up, I look over his naked body, and I grab some rope and I tie him up. I tie his arms to his chest, so basically he's like this. I can't do much. And then I take another piece of rope and I tie it down his front and above his cock, and I make a nice rope for his asshole and tie it back up. And I have a nice handle now. And I push him down the floor in between my thighs. And as I was tying him up, he was watching me so intently that this was already a session that was already going not as planned. So I just felt like I had to take away his vision. He didn't deserve to look at me. So I put a hood and a gag on him and told him that the session was now going to begin. And I pushed him onto the bed, where I proceeded for the next hour to torture him in the most sadistic and pleasurable of ways. And I like to have my sessions have a climax. So they start out really slow, and then they climax, and they come back down and relaxing. I would say the climax of this session was me pouring hot wax onto his cock and his pubic hair, and then scraping it off with a hot knife. He liked it. Don't worry. He liked it. Jeez. Amateurs. And there was also a point at the end of the session when I was winding things down, and he still had the gag in his mouth, and I was putting my fingers in through the gag. And this epic song from the Tron soundtrack was on. And I just so turned on that you could drown a toddler in my leggings at that point. So turned on. I couldn't wear them anymore. I couldn't wear them. So I took them off. He was still hooded at this point. He didn't know I was showing a little bit of skin. And I started to wind the session down. I was doing nicer things. And I had him seated on the floor in between my thighs again, and I pulled off the hood. And I told him that the session was now over. But if he'd like to pleasure me, I was going to show him exactly how to do it. I didn't have to say much, and it was, yes. It was a huge nod. And so I directed his face right above my pussy, and right before I lifted up, and I said, "I'm going to tell you exactly how to pleasure me. Do you understand?" Good. And I pushed his face down on my pussy, and I gave him explicit instructions on how to taste me and touch me and lick me. And it wasn't long before he caught on. I'll give him that. He did a very good job. And I was moaning and squirting and sitting in a puddle of my own cum and coming everywhere. It was great. It was great. And I had to literally forcibly grab his hair and pull it out of my vagina. And then thank him for that epic session of that. And after that was over, I talked to him a little bit, and because this was his first Dom experience ever. And I asked him more about why he had come to see me. And I got some insight as to why he had chose me. And it wasn't because I was the only Dom in the area. No. It was because he liked my style. My style has a lot to do with the mental, and not necessarily trading my physical body for money, but trading my mental powers for money. And I know that I changed him, and I know that he changed me. And after the session was over, I had him dress, and I had him leave. And I was so high from that. So Dom high from that. Because a good Dom takes what the submissive gives them. And sometimes that energy is shitty. And sometimes that energy is heavy. And sometimes that energy is pure euphoria. And I got to taste the sweetest, purest euphoria that I've ever tasted from somebody who had never been experienced or explored kink before. And I thought about that for a long time. I had a long ride home. I decided not to stay in the hotel that night. I decided to go home. And on that ride home, I kept thinking about my clients that I had had in the past and how I had never achieved such a level of euphoria with any of them. And I realized that it had been so long since I had actually helped somebody in the way that I wanted to help somebody. And it felt so good to do so. And the difference between a pure kink and one that's been thought on is almost like a piece of good fruit and a piece of rotten fruit. And the reason why I say that is because fetishes can get corrupted. We can think about them so much that they become mechanical. We remove the human element, and I've seen it so many times of people who don't have outlets for their fetishes, that they remove the human element so that even a professional is probably unable to help them or fulfill them. And that's when I decided that night that I had reached the peak of my game. I had come to the top, and the only way was to go down. So I decided that evening that that was going to be my last session. And it was. And I think about it fondly because of how pure it was and how beautiful. And that's what I wanted to share with you tonight.